if you like big cinematic openings like that, you're going to love our guest today. I am joined by the one and only Mr. Nicholas Buc. Nicholas is a conductor, a composer and an arranger. If you are here in Australia, you might recognise his voice. He is the conductor if you go and see the Star Wars movies with the orchestra in theatres around Australia. You may have even seen him internationally. Nicholas is normally based out in New York, but with the global pandemic, he is back in Melbourne in his home country, and he is working from there, which was great because I was able to get a chance to talk to Nicholas. As you'll hear in this interview, I have seen Nicholas perform twice as a conductor, and he puts on a great show. In this episode, we talk everything classical music, an area I have no idea about, as you'll see as we go along. We figure out that it's not a wand, it's a baton or a baton. I'm not really sure. We talk about the fact that I'll never be musical because I'm probably too old now. And we also discuss travel, jet lag and fitness and have a bit of an interactive conversation around that. And we also talk about the change in music over the last few years and the impact on cinema with movies such as The Dark Knight and the soundtrack by Hans Zimmer. Anyway, lots in here. As you can tell, this is not my area, but it's a very interesting crossover. And I was quite surprised actually, because I think conductors and musicians probably need to do a lot of improvement in the area of performance in terms of physical health and performance, which we talk about in here. So maybe a research study in the future, who knows. Anyway, I hope you enjoy Nicholas Buc in this conversation. It was great having him on. I really appreciate him taking the time out to talk to me. If you see Nicholas advertised anywhere with any of these kind of Star Wars movies or Harry Potter movies with the orchestra, thoroughly recommend it. It's brilliant. It's an experience, as we talk about here. Anyway, on with the episode. Welcome back to Melia's Performance Podcast. Today I am joined by the composer, conductor, arranger, Mr. Nicholas Buc. Nicholas, how are you doing?
I'm fantastic, Ian. It's a pleasure to be here and chat all things music and performance and I guess specifically the crazy world of a traveling musician, which hasn't been so crazy in the last 12 months, but I can certainly impart my knowledge and wisdom about such travels, which hopefully will happen in the near future again.
Well, yes, it is a bit of a crazy time, and I'm actually quite excited about this podcast because I actually got a little bit nervous before we did this podcast today. So for those of you who don't know, Nicholas Buc is a composer, conductor, arranger, as I said in the intro. The first time I saw Nicholas was at the Perth Convention Centre in the main theatre. I think it's called a Riverside Theatre. Hundreds of people in there. My wife is a massive Harry Potter fan, and we used to live actually just across the road from the convention centre in the city. And so we went across to watch, I can't remember which Harry Potter movie it was. We've been to a few that you've done. And basically, for anybody that's not, they put the movie up, the Harry Potter movie up, onto the big screen, and then there's a massive orchestra that sits there and plays the music or the score from the movie. And Nicholas was the conductor. And what really got me was I don't have a classical background. I'm a bit kind of afraid of classical music, and because I know nothing about it. And so I was like, how good is this conductor? He engages with the audience. He gets people involved. You were encouraging people to boo and cheer, but you were also telling people when to be quiet when there was these kind of poignant moments in the movie and when, you know, a person was playing a certain instrument. And I was like, that's a really fun experience. Like, I really wish I got introduced to classical music, or we'll say proper music, if you want to call it that, or what I call it, from someone like Nicholas. So Nick, what kind of got you into, I suppose, and we'll come full circle around to that, but how did you get interested in that sort of style of music as opposed to not, you know, joining a rock band and being famous and like Queen or something else?
Well, look, I studied classical music as a young boy. According to my mother, apparently I wanted to be a conductor when I was 4. Really? I have no recollection of any of this, and since that age, I've never had any bones about actually being a conductor. I played violin and piano growing up, both classical and then on piano, sort of going into the jazz and pop world a bit, more just because I loved pop music and specifically film music, as well as classical stuff as a boy. And so going through university, I studied composition and again, had no interest really in conducting or doing that as a career. I wanted to be a film scorer, like writing music for films, which is still a passion of mine, and still something Hans Zimmer or a John Williams or Jerry Goldsmith, Alan Silvestri. I mean, there's so many wonderful film composers, and the art form of film music has had a real renaissance moment in the last 5 or 10 years, I would say. And a big part of that is, not only the wonderful world of internet and social media and our worlds getting smaller and shrinking as we are networking and connecting with each other, but actually because of what you discussed in your opening, in that the symphony orchestras around the world are starting to connect with new audiences by, rather than just playing, old dead white guys, as they say, music of Brahms and Beethoven and Mozart and Stravinsky and Tchaikovsky, of actually playing music by living composers and specifically film composers. And this great medium where we can now get the rights to a film in order to project it on a big screen and get a cut of the film which has the score removed, leaving just the dialogue and sound effects, so that we can play the music live. And that's a very 21st century experience. It's kind of like opera, from 100 years ago, just reinterpreted for the modern day age. And it's been a real hit with audiences. That's so much so that it's quite invigorated the symphony orchestras, because I think it's safe to say that in this day and age, our attention is torn between Netflix and Twitter and so many other forms of media and digital consumption, that I think going out to see a live concert, one, is a hard task, and two, for an age-old, centuries-old institution like a classical symphony orchestra, it's an even harder task to get new listeners, get new viewers, get new eyeballs, and foot traffic into the concert halls. And this way of presenting film music, together with a cinematic experience of seeing a film, has really transformed that particular industry, and it's super popular all over the world, Ian. I've done this stuff from Finland to France to the Americas, Canada, Tokyo, Australia, everywhere. It's a real massive hit, and it's going to continue post-pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And so for me, going to that one, the first one I went that you were the conductor at, that was like a gateway for me, because I ended up going back to another Harry Potter one that you done at I think the following year, 2 years later. Then I also went to the Perth Symphony Orchestra, who did something with the Ministry of Sound up in Kings Park, which was basically reliving all the kind of, late 90s, early 2000s dance music. And it was all sort of people, probably 38 plus years of age. And so for me, that was awesome. Like my wife and I were up at that. We kind of like, you'd look at each other going, "Oh, I remember this song," and like it kind of had this it was like time travel. It would bring you back to a specific time, like in 1998. You'd be like, "Oh yeah, I was in this place." So that was kind of cool. Then we ended up going to another one with the Perth Symphony Orchestra that was had all the music from the Doors. So I was a fan of the Doors growing up as well, even though I'm not that old. But I sort of got into the Doors in the early 90s with Oliver Stone movie coming out with Val Kilmer. So it was kind of like,
remember that.
Yeah, so it was kind of like one of these things. I went to it once and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to go to more of these." And it was just absolutely fabulous. It was like that kind of gateway. And I was trying to go to a few more, but I was traveling a bit for work. But yeah, it certainly piqued my interest in the classical music area. And I suppose I've never studied music growing up, but I remember even as a youngster, that sort of, we'll say, area of that crossover always fascinated me. Like a story that I actually remembered yesterday in anticipation of this interview was that in 1998, I was in South Lebanon in the Irish Army, and I hate to say this, but I'm gonna incriminate myself here. I bought a bootleg CD for $1 of John Barry's score of Dances with Wolves, and I used to play it in my room.
Oh wow!
So like I was 20 at the time, 1920 at the time, and so that was like probably my first classical music CD that I ever bought, albeit illegally. So
Well, I think, that was one of those, soundtracks that really was almost bigger than the film in some ways, won John Barry an Academy Award. And it's really funny you mentioned that, Ian, because, John Barry has been a huge influence in my career. And I think, as a boy growing up studying classical music, I discovered the Bond films, at about the age of sort of 10 or so. And John Barry, as you may know, did, most of the films up until the mid-90s. He scored almost every Bond film, not all of them, but the majority of them. And his sound was such a great mix of sort of that, the orchestra meets the jazz band, and everything from, you think of all the great songs, Goldfinger, Thunderball, Diamonds Are Forever, even up to later things like Duran Duran's A View to a Kill, massive hit. The first Bond song to reach #1 in the US, believe it or not. And, co-written with John Barry and Duran Duran. He really was the guy that sort of created the spy sound in many ways. Maybe him and Henry Mancini, through the sort of 60s and 70s and 80s. And I was hooked on the Bond films and discovered his music, and then really kind of pivoted into the rest of the wider world of film music. And look, you say you've never been to see a symphony orchestra or never really had an interest in it. I think a lot of people say that, yet they're probably exposed to it more than they think, because every time they watch a film or a TV show, the chances are there's some highly orchestral element in the music somewhere there. Even from kids, like they may not be going to symphony orchestra concerts, but they're consuming all the Pixar films, all the DreamWorks animations, which are chock full of block of orchestral music, and wonderful contemporary orchestral music. That is, a sort of a gateway without them kind of knowing it. So to come full circle and bringing them into a live movie concert experience with an orchestra, I think is a very kind of thrilling but also familiar setting for them, because it just basically highlights a particular part of the art form which they're all very well aware of, and it's a real thrill to see it created live. To hear that glorious Harry Potter theme played by the Celeste, or the French horns, and you can look down in the orchestra and see the musicians there playing and blowing and sweating and all that kind of stuff, moving their bows and creating a ruckus. It's quite a thrill to see it come to life.
And I was actually more intrigued by looking at the orchestra as opposed to watching the movie. I was watching what was going on, and it's just it's pretty amazing, all these different moving pieces. But I think there's one thing that you talk about there, Nick, that is actually kind of similar to other disciplines. Like, you talk about classical music being in movies, or the combination with like orchestra and jazz, and being like, potentially like opera years ago, this kind of crossover domain, or with like Perth Symphony Orchestra doing stuff with the Doors. This is like what we do in science as well, in research. So if you talk about sleep science, like in my area, for example, people are like bored shitless with that. They don't want to hear about it. You talk about sports, you talk about sleep and performance, working with a rugby team or a Formula One driver, or, people go, oh, really? So you kind of cross that domain of like, motorsports, performance, sleep, jet lag. People go, oh, that's really interesting. So I think when you cross over multiple domains is when you can have the biggest impact. And I think that's what these type of concerts are doing. And also as well, like, I grew up in a working class family where you wouldn't go to a concert, as in like classical, you wouldn't sit there. But I think what this type of activity or this type of concert does is you allow people to be people. Like, when there was people dressed up as Voldemort at these things. Like, if you haven't been to one of these things, it's total experience. Like, I dressed up as Voldemort who scared the shit out of me. My wife was going, that guy really looks like Voldemort. Like, whatever sort of suit he had on, he must have spent a lot of money. There was kids dressed up. There you could buy all the gear. My wife had a Gryffindor thing on. There was people dressed up like from all extremes, right down to like, someone's granddad dressed in a suit. It was for everybody, and it was just awesome to see every type of person come to this and engage in it on different levels for different reasons. It's just absolutely, it was mind-boggling. That's why I say, like, I watch more of the orchestra and the people as opposed to watching the movie. I thought it was fascinating. In that respect.
And you're talking about, breaking down barriers and crossing over. I mean, I think the general perception is that a lot of people don't know the etiquette, or what the etiquette is when they go to a classical concert. I think the perception is that everyone sort of sits there in dead silence, and it's quite a stuffy atmosphere, and you just listen in silence, and even applause is sort of a bit, well, is this the right moment to clap?
Yeah.
There's always a typical thing in symphony orchestra concerts that whenever a symphony is performed, which generally in the olden days consists of 4 movements, it's poor manners to clap between movements. You need to wait till the entire symphony has been completed before you break into applause. And so there's always been this fear or not quite sure what to do moment for audience members. And so, for them to discover as an audience, oh wow, we can dress up, we can cheer, we can have fun, we can be a bit raucous. It's a real surprise moment for them, and a real barrier breaker. It's like kind of like letting their hair down. It's kind of like a bit cheeky. We're at the symphony orchestra and we're laughing, we're eating popcorn, we're drinking butter beer or whatever they're selling out the front, and we're wearing a silly hat. I mean, that's quite a unique thing that you probably wouldn't expect you'd be allowed to do at a classical music venue. So that's a real fantastic icebreaker for the audience. And to be honest, the perception amongst players and even organizations who run these orchestras has changed as they've realized what a great new avenue this stuff is. And I still talk to some members of the orchestra who kind of, turn their nose up a bit at these inverted commas pops concerts. There's a particular viewpoint that says they're not serious enough, that it's a bit lowbrow, it's sort of catering to the masses. There's definitely a bit of a snob factor amongst some playing ranks. But I will say that is changing drastically, because at the end of the day, if the music's great, that's a bonus for the orchestra to play fantastic music. And more to the point, I mean, everyone likes to play to an enthusiastic crowd. It's something about just herd mentality when you're playing music and 2,000 people are cheering as you're playing. I mean, it's a pretty special thing, and it's not something you'd typically get at a concert, especially if you're playing an old masterwork such as Beethoven. You generally sit in complete silence.
So for you,
so it's almost akin to a football match in some ways.
Actually, you talk about people having experiences. The guys that were sitting beside me when I went to watch the Perth Symphony Orchestra and the Doors, because it was at the Majesty's Theatre here in the city centre, the 2 guys to the left of me were on acid. So that was quite interesting. They were in their probably late 40s, early 50s, and they had taken acid. So I think, classical music is for everybody.
Exactly.
So, Nicholas, what is that like when you get up in front of, you do these concerts in the evening, you get up in front of people, and like you say, it is like, for want of a better word, being like a rock star. Like how do you feel as a conductor? Like, do you get into this phase or this state of flow, and it's all moving, and it must be highly exhilarating? Like how do you manage that, and then how do you kind of wind down after that as well?
So look, I've been told by several players that when they watch me conduct in these film concerts, that I go into a zone or like a sort of a certain plane of being, if you will. And I think, any conductor will tell you that you've got to pace yourself for a performance. It's a bit like being an athlete, especially on stage for 60 minutes straight, sometimes longer, waving your arms about, and there's a physicality of just sort of conducting, which is quite a physical sport. I will say that. Some people think, they're just sort of standing there. How hard can it be? But it's a real physical workout, especially if you are playing loud, fast action music, which is all over these Hollywood films. It's not like just a walk in the park of easy, beautiful, romantic ballads. And so there's the physicality of it, but there's also the mental concentration. Conducting is one of these things where there's a bit of magic involved, but it's a case of you are kind of in command of an army. and it's a very highly trained, oiled army. But they are all musicians working at a high caliber, and it's almost like you're both egging each other on to get the best possible performance. So the level of concentration, leadership, physicality, and emotional input that you have to put into the music to get, the very best result is quite a taxing thing. And I'm usually pretty knackered after these things. And if it wasn't for adrenaline, oh boy, I'd be lost at sea, because no other thing that I do motivates me more than just my adrenal glands. And it's probably that thing you mentioned about sort of the rock star attitude. You come out to applause, it's hard to be shy and insular when you've got 2,000 people cheering and you can tell that they're revved up and excited. So to turn around and encourage that even more, it's in some ways it's helping them to egg on myself and the orchestra. Yeah. Because when I see they're enthusiastic, that in turn makes me excited, and I think really heightens my performance. Because I've conducted, for want of a better word, more serious classical pieces in my career as well, and it's a very different kind of applause, and it's a different atmosphere. You feel a bit more lonely up on stage, to be honest. It's like people are there sitting in silence. It's like a very quiet art gallery. They're just waiting for you to create the art, versus walking out onto like a sports team, walking out onto a football field. That crowd enthusiasm really plays a huge impact for myself and the orchestra.
So, Nick, does that actually then affect how you will say get ready for one of these events? Do you do any sort of physical warm-up beforehand because there is so much movement during it? Or does if you're doing a kind of a more classical, serious thing, is it more like meditative? I want to get into the zone. I need to be mentally there. Whereas if you're going out doing a Harry Potter or Lion King, Jurassic Park type of thing, do you do more stretching, wave your arms around, kind of bounce on the spot like a fighter? How does your pre-concert, rev up change between event?
Look, I think they both have, both of them require immense amounts of preparation beforehand in terms of, learning the music and just being confident in that respect. But I generally get a greater level of excitement from the film concerts. And I think it's just because of what I said, because that the audience is there and they're excited. And I feel a bit more relaxed actually with a film audience, because I know that there's many first timers there. They're looking for some kind of gesture from the stage that, hey, it's okay to kind of kick your shoes off and let your hair down and relax and cheer and laugh and even chatter a bit, and giggle to each other about certain moments. So I really much look forward to that first, running out on stage, grabbing the microphone and sort of being a bit of an MC for the evening, which I don't always do for a normal kind of classical concert. And I think that really helps become the icebreaker, and in turn lets the audience know that it's okay to relax. And I think that fuels my own excitement in turn.
So, Nicholas, I'm going to divert here because I had a few, I told some people that I was going to interview you, and I had a few weird questions for me. So here's a few weird questions I'm going to throw at you. Number one, what's the stick in your hand called that you wave around?
It's called a baton, not a wand.
Not a wand, yeah. I kept saying wand if I couldn't think of the baton. Secondly,
baton.
Why do conductors make all those crazy movements with their bodies and their hands and make their face contort and bend backwards and forwards? And what's all that about? What's the purpose of all that movement?
It's a physical and facial reaction to the music. And conducting, really, in its simplest terms, is broken down to two things. There's the fundamental role of conducting the beat. If something is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, to use the simplest example, there is a certain pattern that most conductors will do to convey that. But that's just semantics. That's just, literally being a metronome, a human metronome. The magic and the rest of it, and what really separates great conductors from not so great conductors, is what they can get with their physical presence. And it's kind of an amazing thing, because you're the silent musician. I make no noise apart from maybe a grunt here and there. But when my hands go through the air, they're not creating notes, they're not creating sounds. They're just really silent physical gestures. So the only thing I can do to communicate is make, bigger gestures, smaller gestures, contort my face. It's kind of like being an overpaid mime artist trying to encourage 80 people to do something.
Yeah.
I can't shout at them. I can't yell at them. I can't say things. It all needs to happen with my physical body. So that explains all the crazy movements.
Right. Excellent. And so what is it that makes people, and maybe you know this, maybe you don't, I'm not looking for a scientific answer here, but what is it that makes music or makes people react to music in different ways? For example, I said about the John Barry CD, didn't grow up with classical music. Why was I so attracted to that? I liked the movie, but the music really caught me. Or in the Batman Dark Knight series, in the Batman series recently by Christopher Nolan, like Hans Zimmer's music. I don't know, for some reason I resonate with that. Like even to the point of where I go out and run 10Ks, I listen to the Dark Knight soundtrack as opposed to listening to exercise music. And it puts me in a kind of a zone. Or if you're driving in the car and you are listening to, I don't know, some romantic song and you start crying because your girlfriend when you were 13 broke up with you over that song. What is it that makes people react to music so much? Is there some format, what do you think it is?
Look, there are two things. I'll talk about timbre, which is like the quality of sounds that you are hearing. And I guess the next word is probably things like harmony. And throughout history, music has evolved. You can hear something from the Baroque period, J.S. Bach, one of the great master composers from the Baroque era. And his music has a certain quality, and that's because it uses certain similar groups of notes connected together. Now, something like John Barry Dance with Wolves, his use of harmony, like the notes that he actually uses and the chords that he uses, are very simple, and they're very based in pop music. You probably hear similar chord progression in a Beatles song somewhere, but and so that creates a certain comfort in us. And combine that with a beautiful large string orchestra, which this gets back to my comment about timbre. It's a very soft, warm, embracing kind of sound, just from those string instruments. It's very smooth, it's romantic. And just through our knowledge of music and experience of other bits of string orchestra music, that combines to make us feel warm, calm, nostalgic, longing. Just the way those fibers are sort of resonating inside of us because of those sounds. And conversely, take something like Hans Zimmer's music, and especially stuff for The Dark Knight. He has this great knack of really channeling adrenaline in music.
Yes.
And it's because it's there's a very strong physicality to it. Film music, especially in the last 20 years, has really relied on this technique called ostinato, which is basically like a repetitive rhythmic pattern. So, think of anything like dance music, techno beat is like, it's just this repetitive thump that it's almost like a virtual heartbeat, and it basically gets your adrenaline going because of its repetitive nature. Hans Zimmer has managed to kind of channel that with an orchestra. So all his music for The Dark Knight has a very propulsive, repetitive, almost like a pulsing heartbeat, and it just gets your blood flowing. It's sort of like the musical equivalent of heartbeats and blood moving through the body quickly. And I think that really just inspires something inside of people to move. And whether you're driving, whether you're working out, it's that physical reaction to the physical movement of the music that really connects those dots.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that to slightly change or use different word, and I would find, I get what you're saying about the kind of dance music. It's more like a kind of a heart rhythm or a kind of, high cardio, if you want to call it that. Whereas Hans Zimmer, for some reason, just for me, is more primal. It's more...
Yeah.
It's really I just feel like I want to lift weights, run, scream, jump up and down. I don't know what about it is. And recently I watched Tenet, which is a Christopher Nolan movie, but that has a different composer. But I thought it was Hans Zimmer, but it's a guy
No,
called
it's Ludwig Göransson.
Göransson, yeah. And that was but very similar to Hans Zimmer style. And I actually thought, oh, it's interesting. Is this guy Hans Zimmer's son, or just copying him, or very similar? But had that same feeling where I was like, man, I just want to get up and lift weights and jump around. Like, it's really interesting, like how it sparks that kind of reaction in humans. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and look, that's actually been a trend in film music over the last 20 years, that a lot of people credit and in some circles blame Hans Zimmer for what they call the sound of the modern day action blockbuster. And you think of films like the Dark Knight trilogy, the Bourne films, the Jason Bourne films. Different composer, but similar school of thought, where instead of very obvious melodies, which we are used to from like the 80s and 90s, think of blockbusters like E.T., Star Wars, Jurassic Park, Dance with Wolves, Superman, very memorable orchestral melodies. In this day and age, we've sort of forgone that in favor of propulsion, momentum, and a bit more of a sort of turbulent undercurrent in our film scores. That you could argue a bit more sitting in the background and are sort of just creating this sort of blank canvas of hypnotic propulsion that lets filmmakers, it's a bit more ambiguous what they're wanting you to feel, apart from, this sort of hyperkinetic tension, which is very pervasive in modern day films. It's less prescriptive, shall we say, than a very beautiful, heroic John Williams melody, for example.
So before we get on to some more kind of individual performance stuff around travel, I just have one question that probably always intrigues me. If you're a composer and you're writing a score for a movie, such as like the Hans Zimmer one with the Batman one, do you sit down with the director, Christopher Nolan, and say, like, what are you trying to achieve here? Do you wait for the first cut to be done? Are you on set while it's getting filmed? Like, how do you kind of take the raw footage, the director's intent, the story, like paying homage, like let's say to the Batman stuff that was, been around for a long time, coming from comics. How do you strike a balance? Or do you write that completely independent and then come back with a version once the first cut has been done with the director and see if that matches, and you could be potentially completely off? Or how does that work?
It is actually everything that you said. And all those scenarios are very valid, and sometimes it's a combination of all of them. So take someone like Christopher Nolan and Hans Zimmer, their relationship is very close. And on many of their films, Christopher Nolan will get Hans Zimmer to write a whole heap of music before he even sees the film. It'll just be like, here's an idea, here's a concept. I'm not going to tell you any more. I'm not going to let you read the script. Just here's an idea. Go off and write something. And then, that's a starting point for conversations. Then he might read a script and have some more ideas based on reading a script. And then finally, he'll watch the film. And, at the end of the day, the nuts and bolts of scoring a film come down to what they call a spotting session, where you and the director will watch the film and decide where music is needed. But that's a very kind of specific way of composing. There's also, like I said, the overview way of just sort of writing generalized ideas about a film away from the picture, and then coming back to it and actually filling in the gaps and actually making it fit the actual timings of certain scenes. So there's no right way. Composers through history have done it in many different ways. I worked with Nick Cave and Warren Ellis recently, who've, gone from their kind of uber, cult status as these great band members, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and, Warren, often his right-hand man there. They've moved into film scoring recently. And believe it or not, most of their film scores are written without seeing the film. It's just based on a story or a conversation with the director. They'll just go into a studio and jam on some ideas, based. It's sort of like a complementary art form. Someone over here is making a film, and then I'm going to go over here and write some music based on what I think this film might end like. And that's a very valid way. It's not necessarily the only way, but it's a perfectly valid way of writing music, because there is no right and wrong. And the opposite end of the example, John Williams will very carefully go through a film scene by scene and make very careful timings about where the first note will come in and where the last note will stop in any given scene. So yeah, the answer is anything goes in this day and age.
So a bit like what we talk about in this podcast, Nicholas, or what The Economist says, it depends.
It depends.
It depends.
Yeah.
I don't say that at home though. I just say yes, dear, and I go off and I do what I'm told.
I mean, look, I'm writing a film score at the moment, and I've written about 20 minutes worth of music already, and I haven't seen any of the film. I've just read a script and talked to the director, and that's a way of the director will actually use it on set. As he's filming actors, he'll play some of the music just to get them in the zone, get them in this particular mood. Because like you said, different types of music can really have an effect on your emotional state. And I think as actors, it's very difficult to just bring out these emotions from a cold start. So having some music to inspire them is a wonderful way to go about it.
So can you tell us what the movie is?
No, I can't yet. It's still a secret, as these things are. But it is set in Melbourne. It's a local film, and it's set in the 90s. So it's a bit of a throwback, but it's very fun, very clever.
Right. So no coronavirus or lockdowns. That'll be a relief to most people.
No.
So Nicholas, let's get into some of the crux about how you actually kind of, manage your performance, I suppose, so to speak, as a conductor, because you're currently in Melbourne.
Yes, I am.
But you're normally based in New York. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've been based in New York since 2014, and I was out in Australia last year about this time, sort of February, March, on tour with Ben Folds, the American pianist and singer. And coronavirus hit, so I just sort of stayed. I've got some family here and have been here ever since. But normally I'd be traveling at least once or twice a month, and usually changing countries every 4 weeks. So it's quite a toll on the body.
So if you're based out of New York and you're, like you say, I've done these shows in Finland and, all over the world, how many days would you get into a city? So let's say you go from New York to Helsinki, right? And you're traveling in an easterly direction, probably going up, it's probably like 6 or 7 hours time difference. How many days beforehand, if the concert's on Saturday night, what does your week look like before the concert on a Saturday night?
So usually I'll have 2 to 3 rehearsals. So we might have 2 rehearsals on Friday, 1 on Saturday morning. And it's often very likely I'll arrive on Thursday. So only a day ahead. If I'm lucky, maybe a day before to acclimatize my body. But look, it always depends on, where I've been, where I'm going, and how tight the connections are. But it's usually not more than a day or 2. It's certainly never a whole week. So I am, I've got my systems and patterns of sleeping pretty good with jet lag these days. I'm pretty meticulous about even a couple of days leading up to my travel. I'll start trying to change my bedtimes and wake times so they're at least a little closer to my time zone that I'm heading to. I mean, I don't know how much science there is on this stuff, but someone told me that for every hour you change time zones, like, time zone difference is like a day of extra recovery you need. I'm not sure if that's true because
well, Nicholas, you are in luck, because my PhD is in what we call sleep science chronobiology this area. Just before Christmas, published a paper in the world's top sports journal with a bunch of other people, which was on travel fatigue and jet lag interventions in athletes. We also have a consensus paper going in, and this year I am working with a Formula One team as their travel and jet lag advisor. So maybe we can flip it around and you can ask me all the questions. But in general, yes, when you travel in an easterly direction, so New York to Helsinki, for example, using that again, if you travel in the easterly direction, for every 1 hour time zone you cross, takes you approximately a day to synchronize. For every time zone you travel in a westerly direction will take you about a half a day. So it's always easier to adapt going west than it is going east. Lots of people think this is I've come back from London to Perth and it's after my holiday, so I'm tired. It's like, no, it's actually harder to adapt. Lots of Australians say about this when they go to Europe, it's always easy because they're on holidays, and then when they come back it's worse. It's actually got to do with this crossing of different time zones.
Well, look, my biggest trip is usually Australia to New York, and that makes sense. I'm always much more knackered and tired heading back to New York than I am coming back to Australia. I'm often surprised when I land in Australia, which is generally pretty early in the morning, about 6 or 7 o'clock is when the flights land.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm sort of surprised that I can usually stay up all day, whereas in New York, I'm just conked out for days.
Yeah.
Arriving there, so that's interesting. There you go.
Yeah, so there is science behind it. However, there is lots of things you can do to advance that. Like you said, you can start sleeping, as close as you can before you leave. And you can do things like, which I'm interested to hear, is like what do you do for caffeine and alcohol during that week?
Look, I drink coffee usually twice a day. I'm not a big drinker, and the more I fly, the more I'm realizing that drinking on the plane is like the worst thing that I can do.
Yeah.
I used to think, got nothing to do. I'll have a couple of wines or whatever. Maybe it might help me sleep, but in general, it makes me feel worse. So I generally won't have coffee on a plane as well. I don't change any intake of coffee leading up to my trips, and maybe that's something I've never thought about, but definitely the alcohol one is something I really try to avoid when I'm flying.
Yeah, I think your caffeine consumption isn't very high anyway, so you're probably all right. But the alcohol is where people get the biggest bang for their buck in terms of reduction or elimination. Because, and I find actually the more people travel, the less alcohol they start consuming. A lot of the frequent flyers just go, you know what, I just couldn't be bothered with it. But people who intermittently travel will go, I'll have 1 or 2 at the airport, and then I'll have 1 or 2 on the plane, because I don't fly that often. But you're right, you get off the other end and you will feel.
When I'm like in an airport lounge, I'm usually downing bottles of water rather than glasses of champagne. I know it's free and it looks very exciting. Oh, free champagne and wine, but like after the first few times you do it, it's not that exciting, and I'd much rather get the hydration up. And I find sitting is very bad for the body. That's the more liquid I consume, water, the more I'll need to go to the toilet, and that's my forced leg stretch, if you like. I probably go to the toilet on the plane far more than I probably should, just because I'm trying to drink so much water. But it really makes me feel better. I really can't stress that enough.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we found as well, looking at the evidence as well. And this systematic review before Christmas is like using, fruit juices and water to keep hydrated is very good, because we dehydrate more when we're on a plane and when we're traveling, and lots of time sitting. So we promote people getting up and moving around. Do you wear any sort of medical socks, Nicholas, or any sort of compression garments while you're traveling?
No, that's something I've never tried. And I'd be very fascinated to know if it helps. I'm maybe a bit suspicious about that, but you may be the expert.
Yeah, well, I think the evidence shows that, like, if you put on something like, a pair of skins that's like long pants.
I have a pair of them.
Well, they're the thing you shouldn't wear. And people actually wear. Yeah, they're the things that people wear and shouldn't. What you should really only wear is like medical grade socks that you can buy in a chemist that go over the entire foot and go over the calf and up to the knee. So people wearing skins and, any of these sort of recovery sports stuff, don't wear those, but socks up to the knee, compression socks.
Is that because the, like the buttocks and the thighs and stuff, should they be kind of kept freer for blood flow versus the calves? Like, what's the secret about the feet and the calves that need to be compressed?
Well, sort of when you have the long sleeve skins top on or the pants, they actually create an occlusion, because at the bottom of them, they're actually restricting the blood flow to your feet. So they don't go over your entire foot, whereas the medical grade socks does, but allows blood flow and promotes blood flow. So that's the evidence so far, is that that's the best thing to wear. And I've seen guys getting onto planes and wearing full skins outfits. Oh, really? I used to travel a lot, and I used to travel business for work, and you'd see these guys getting on that strip off and have these full like skins things on, and it's the worst thing you can actually do. So yeah.
Well, that's interesting. No, look, I usually wear very loose-fitting clothing, but I've never really thought about the whole sock and calf thing. But I'll investigate that, especially if I'm conducting and then going to be on my feet.
Yeah,
that's probably a good thing. I mean, look, to be honest, my my biggest issue as a conductor are back and shoulders. They're the things that get the sorest. And lower back, like that the muscle I wish my body didn't have is the QL.
Yes.
The quorum lombarda, whatever it's called. That is the bane of my existence. I'm not sure what I need to do, but it's just the thing that will flare up sooner than anything else and cause me the most strife, whether it's conducting or flying. And whenever I have, physical therapy, it's usually the one thing that I've had people told me it feels like a concrete slab. It's just a hard, angry muscle that is, holding me back. So I'm not sure whether I should be wearing some kind of back brace or something, or it's just something I just need to kind of stretch and exercise on the other end. I'm really not sure.
Do you lean to one side, Nicholas, when you conduct or when you compose or when you're working at home? Do you tend to go to one side?
Look, I conduct with my right hand, so that definitely gets more work than the left. And I've been told that my right QL is sort of in worse shape. When I'm sitting, I don't think so. I think it's pretty even. But it's definitely the right-hand side because of my right-handed conducting.
So for the people that listen to this podcast regular will be, sick to death or bored senseless listening to me talk about back issues. So I had my spine fused last year.
Wow.
From years of damage. But anyway, I think another one of the symptoms that I had, I'm not saying this is you, was actually I had QL issues on my right-hand side as well. So one of the things that really helped me with my QL, and it might be something to try, is 3 to 4 times a week of yoga.
Yoga. Wow. Okay.
And I found it was really good when I was traveling a lot because you can, get all these apps. There's heaps of free stuff on YouTube. You can do it in your hotel room. You don't even need to bring exercise gear. You can do it in your underwear or naked, as some people have told me. You can do it however you want, So it's really, it's portable. It's easy. And I've had massive improvements in my QL from doing yoga and just more stretching as well. So I think that might be, it may or may not help.
And what are your thoughts on that versus, say, Pilates? Because I've done both yoga and Pilates in New York, a small amount, but they're both things that I'd never done before. And I thought that's sort of the very popular thing in New York. Every second street has a yoga or Pilates studio. So I thought I'd try them out. I found Pilates easier than yoga, but that's probably because I'm quite stiff and not that flexible. Yeah. Is there are they complementary? What's your opinion there? Because I'd be very curious.
So I think they're definitely complementary and they're both beneficial. I think with anything, you've got to have a long-term approach to it to get the benefits out of it. So, I used to do a lot of long distance running. I'm back doing that again. When I'm talking about long distance, I'm talking about like 100 Ks plus in races. I swam to Rottnest Island before Christmas. So I like a lot. I like that long distance endurance stuff where I'm going for like 7 to 30 hours. Ran in the Colorado Rockies and stuff like that for over a day continuous. Wow. So I like that sort of thing, but I also do a lot of martial arts and I'm ex-military. So I've got lots of issues. So for me, I have to be sustained at something for a long period of time before I get the benefit from it. So I think you need to be doing it for at least 2 to 3 times a week for at least 6 months continuous. And that's why I started going to more online stuff because I wasn't able to constantly go to a yoga studio where I got massive benefits, and it's great because it kind of holds you accountable. But I think having stuff that's portable in this day and age, and with the coronavirus, I just do most of my stuff now at home, and I find that really helps. But in conjunction as well, I think anything where you're strengthening your body, I would, and that's why I asked you earlier on about the physicality of being a conductor, because I think the other thing you might want to think about is actually doing some stretching beforehand.
Yes.
And
I'm a terrible stretcher.
Yeah. And just getting your body a little bit more loose and using some more movement. And the other thing might be even using some breathing techniques to, because some people have a tight diaphragm that leads into tight QL. Yeah. So it's kind of looking at it more holistically. And that's what some people are doing to actually help them get ready, whether it be for a physical event or something like what you're doing. I've even seen people do it before meetings. In actual fact, in industrial settings, a lot of people doing occupational work, working in mining or maintenance, are actually doing stretching and movement-based activities at the start of the morning as part of their daily start meeting. So, it's definitely something that can help. It definitely won't do you any harm.
No. And look, I do a lot of strength training, and I'm a serial non-stretcher. I usually just I've got a little home sort of gym, with bench press and a little weight rack and stuff, and I usually just go straight into it, which is probably not the best thing. And then maybe I think it's the same with performing. I'm a little. I'm not sure if impatient is the word, or I'm very sort of the moment. I just want to go out. I'm a very spontaneous person, I think is probably what I'm trying to say. And I'm very quick on my feet and reactionary in terms of, if I'm put in a high pressure situation, I'll just start going. But I think a bit of preparation probably for my body certainly would not go astray in just sort of having a bit of a calm before the storm, so to speak, rather than ripping straight into a weight session, doing some stretching or a little warm up, and definitely the same with my conducting. That's probably why I have QL issues.
Yeah. And I think you're probably similar to me. Like do you mind me asking how old you are, Nicholas?
I'm 30. Oh, I just turned 39.
Just turned 39. Yeah.
You're the first person I've told. I'm 39.
Oh, there you go. So I'm a few years older than you, but not much though. But I think as you get older, there's more of an importance on this. And I was actually on a podcast yesterday, the Grin Reapers, with a guy called Chris White. They've got a podcast more jovial than our one, but Chris.
So it doesn't sound more jovial.
Grin Reapers are a bunch of jokers.
Grin Reapers. Okay.
Not Grim. Chris was on Ninja Warrior last year for us in Australia.
Oh, wow.
So, we were just talking about this thing that basically, as you start getting older, you start feeling more focus has to be on recovery, stretching, keeping yourself, kind of loose and supple, and you're more prone to injuries. You get tight. It gets kind of harder. And I don't know about you, but when I was younger, you saw a guy in their 40s doing kind of what I'm doing. You were you never saw them. And it was sort of once you hit your 40s, people were like old men. Whereas now, lots of people are really active in their 40s and 50s. And sort of with that, you need to be a bit more balanced, I think, with a bit more, yoga.
Look, totally. And look, there's been a huge surge in just the fitness movement on the whole. I think people are far more aware of, being active. Look on social media, every second person is a fitness influencer. I'm not saying they have great advice, but at least there's at least we're talking about these things. And even on the flip side, things like meditation and mindfulness, that is a huge thing. And it's actually something my wife has got me a little bit into. I'm still not very into it, but I certainly know that when I do try it, God, it makes a difference. And I keep saying, why don't I just take 20 minutes every morning and sit quietly with my thoughts instead of diving into the news or a music project or whatever. I think it's, the information overload that we live in is kind of making us sedentary. And at the same time, we are witnessing, we're sitting on our asses on our couches reading about all these fit people on Instagram. It's sort of
quite ironic.
It's quite ironic. So less reading and more action.
So if anybody's interested in meditation, I've got 2 episodes on this podcast. You can go back and listen to Lama Soridas, who is an American Lama who studied with the Dalai Lama. He's on there. He was one of the famous guys that went over in the 70s, one of the Das brothers. So Ram Dass, who died recently, was friends of his.
Oh, yes.
So it was Ram Dass, Lama Sori Das, and Krishna Das. So he was on my podcast a couple of years ago, so you can go back and listen to that episode. But also we had a friend of mine, Buddha Rakata, who's a Theravadan Buddhist monk who was here in Perth, but is now in Sri Lanka. He's got a background in chemistry. So he's on talking about meditation. And I've been on a few silent retreats myself. So but like you, Nicholas, I'm kind of laughing here because I'm the same. I'm like 110% go the whole time. I find it difficult to meditate and I find it difficult to stretch and relax. I'm just constantly, 100%, if not more every day. So I empathize. I jump out of bed, like looking at the news, drinking coffee, trying to shower at the one time and let's go, So it can be difficult, but there is benefit in sort of taking that time out.
I'd also be interested, Ian, to have your thoughts on, because, the other side of my career is the opposite of conducting, where it's a very sedentary lifestyle of composing and arranging, at a music desk.
Yes.
With long periods of sitting and crouched over a keyboard or writing music. And And I'd be interested in your thoughts on the whole sort of standing desk revolution and whether there are any benefits to that, or is it sort of a bit of a overhyped thing? Because I'm looking at potentially investing in one of those standing desks for home, and wondering if it's something that I'd never use or would annoy me or would be a fantastic and life-changing thing.
It's interesting you asked that question, because as you were talking earlier on, I was thinking about being the difference between a conductor and a composer. When you're composing, I presume you're more kind of introverted and you're, looking at stuff on your own. And when you're conducting, you're more extrovert. And I'm like that to a certain degree in terms of my scientific research. I'll sit here, analyze data, write stuff. I need quiet. But then I can go out and then speak to, X amount of people, or go out and work with athletes, and you have to be very extroverted, influencing. So you're kind of changing. So I think that's interesting that you have to go in now those zones, which also influences my music choice when I'm at home. Funny enough, actually, when I'm writing scientific papers, do you know who I listen to? Metallica.
Oh, really?
It's really weird.
Wow.
I don't know what it is, but
That's very weird.
Heavy. It's very, maybe there's a few neurons now fire in there, but Metallica seems to help me write scientifically.
Wow.
I am a weirdo. Anyway. So the thing
you need help.
I do need help. Yeah. The thing with the standing desk is I don't know what the research says, as in I haven't looked at it. For me, I got a standing desk a few years ago and actually made me worse. It actually exacerbated my QL issue. That's why I asked you the question, because I was leaning to one side at the desk.
Yeah.
So for me, that was a problem. So now what I tried to do is I got a better chair. I got a better level desk. I have multiple screens as opposed to just working off a laptop. I've got a keyboard. I've got a mouse ergonomically set up better. But also I take breaks throughout the day. And I also change the type of activity I do throughout the day. So where I would stay at a computer all day for 10 hours sometimes, and then go out and run for an hour, then come back. Like I could maybe get up in the morning, have coffee, 5 hours at a desk, then go, I need to get out of here, go out and run for an hour or two, come back, shower, not stretch, and then sit at the desk for the rest of the day. Yeah. And then go back there after dinner doing stuff. And it's sort of high bouts of high activity, and then bouts of zero activity. So I think it's trying to look and see if you can level out through the day by using a timer, stretch. And if you're like me, working, in your own kind of bubble, you can, wear loose fitting clothing, you can stretch, you can take a break, you can walk outside, you can, do whatever you want kind of throughout the day. So you do have a lot of control, I would suggest, over compared to somebody in an office block. So I would look at doing more of that kind of movement and changing of position throughout the day, as opposed to a bit like what you do in a plane, as opposed to standing. Or looking for a solution there. And then the other thing is there's these Vari desks you can get to go on top of a desk, and obviously they're beneficial and lots of companies have them. But I know, and this is only from someone who told me they had a Vari desk and then they got rid of it, and then they got more of a mechanical desk that the whole desk goes up and down. And then once they got that, and it was like $2,000 or $3,000, they were like completely different. Wow. So I think it's going to depend on a few factors, but I'd probably urge you to make some changes first yourself if you can. Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm standing now as we speak, and I notice that, especially when I'm conducting, I often sit into my hips and, almost get a bit of a sway back. And so I'm always thinking about my posture, that a lot of it, and I think my often poor posture and sitting into the hips comes from that I do sit too much and my hamstrings get super tight. Yeah. And that's, again, where stretching probably would help all walks of my life, from just standing to even walking. Squatting, I find getting deep squats with correct form is often difficult because I have such tight hamstrings. And I think, can prevent, gaining weight and going up through the weight levels, because I'm sort of limited by my movement. And so I can only kind of lift so much because of that very restriction. And I'm sure that something like stretching would help that. But I do worry that if I got like a standing desk, back to this subject, that I'd just sit into my hips and make it worse, my posture all day.
Yeah.
So maybe you're getting a better chair and thinking about those things, and just like you said, more regular breaks and stretches. Would be beneficial.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just taking a more holistic approach, like we we're saying about stretching, that's obviously going to help you looking at your ergonomic setup and just trying to get more general movement into the day as opposed to, highly sedentary periods, which is obviously hard because it sounds like you get in a groove and you don't want to move. And then it's hard to get up and move around. So,
something I did find helped, and I can't remember where I got this tip from, but it basically every morning I get up and I hang from a chin-up bar that kind of sits in my door frame architrave, and just hang for about 60 seconds, and I find it's just, I don't know, maybe my body compresses overnight, but it's just a very simple act of hanging from these bars with my natural body weight just helps to kind of it's almost like a sort of forced elongation and stretch in the morning. That's something I find very beneficial.
Yes, and there's been a book on that, and a lot of people advocate that in terms of release through your upper back, around your traps and your shoulders to help release that, because a lot of neck and shoulder issues come from that kind of compression. And so one of the best things to do is actually hang from a bar or hang from rings. That was one of the things I was doing and got some benefit from it. But then I figured out that my spine was collapsing from an MRI. So no matter how many times I hung upside down or did anything, or it wasn't going to help. But I definitely did get a lot of relief from hanging, and lots of people do talk about hanging by the hands from a bar or so on. Yeah. So that would be helpful. Nick, coming back to when you travel and you land in a place, obviously you pair up or team up with local orchestras, such as, for example, you came here to Perth and you worked with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra. In some cases, these guys, and I use guys collectively, guys and girls, everybody inclusive. Sorry, they may not know you, or they may not know your temperament, or they may have worked with an asshole conductor previously, and then you rock up and they don't know you. How do you build that rapport and provide leadership in such a short space of time? What sort of things do you do to do that? Because I would imagine that's quite difficult in some cases.
Look, to be honest, it's the make or break moment. Before I'm even getting into the bones of the music, I really feel that most orchestras have sort of sussed you out in the first 5 minutes. So it's something we think about almost as much as the rest of the rehearsal. Look, I'm lucky in Australia that I've worked with many of the symphony orchestras a lot, and so I know them. But especially overseas, and especially overseas with language barriers, you've got to be even more careful and think about it. And I found the best solution is to absolutely be myself. Show a genuine identity that is Nicholas Buc. And for me, that's a much more relaxed, friendly, jokey, laughy approach that I know will, it's like any kind of speech you'd give it in a room full of people, whether it's a wedding or a conference or whatever. A couple of funny jokes, lightheartedness, easygoing kind of disposition really helps to break the ice. And I guess what I'm saying is I back that up with, once we get into the music, I'm all business, and I can show that with my gestures, with my knowledge of the music. That's what lets them know, okay, look, this guy seems pretty fun, relaxed, easygoing, but he knows what he's doing. And I'm sure there'd be many examples where you'd get someone who is kind of joking, relaxed, and then that is all they are, and the rehearsal's a bit of a shambles, and it's a bit kind of, there's no time management of getting through the material and whatnot. So I find balancing those two items is really good, and has worked very well in my favor. But it's certainly something that I am cognizant of, and even sometimes plan. Just, where are we? What's something I can use to break the ice? Has there been some kind of event in the orchestra's history in the last week? Was there a great review they had from some other concert? I'll try and find that out. Just, give some little anecdote or whatever. At the end of the day, these are people, and you're working with them. So it's that combination of being a people person as well as an army general, and striking that balance.
Do you find then, Nick, that like you said about your age, like you're not that old. So do you find that people look at you with a bit of trepidation and go, "Oh, this guy's just a young guy. What does he know?" Like, does the experience and the age kind of matter?
Look, I think it can if you let it get to you. But I'm, like I said, I'm aware that people will probably make that judgment before I even open my mouth. When I walk in the room, especially at a new orchestra, you can see musicians going, "Oh, is that the conductor?" And I'm sure they're making judgments already. What's his accent like? God, he's got a funny walk, or oh, he's cute, or God, as if he'd know anything. He looks too young. There could be all these things going through their head. So that's why, the first couple of minutes, I'll try and let them know, who I am, without saying, "Hi, I'm Nick, I was born here." Just be my usual self, which is a very friendly, people person orientated kind of style. And then let my actual musicality be the final, judgment maker for them. Because at the end of the day, once I'm waving my arms and they're playing and they're getting everything I need from them and vice versa, I think they'll make that judgment irrespective of my age.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because running the risk of kissing your ass here again, you are a very likable guy, and from seeing you twice sitting up the back looking down, my wife and I have discussed if there was a different conductor, it wouldn't work. And so that energy comes across into the audience. You can see it then coming across into the orchestra themselves, how you interact with them as well. So it's it is really interesting that you say you are just being yourself, because that kind of resonates not just to the orchestra but to the crowd as well. That's great to know, because I think what that little pre-show rev up and speech that I usually do at concerts is kind of a similar thing I do to the orchestra, just be about different things, but the manner, the style, that's kind of what I mean about showing just a little glimpse of my personality, enough to make people at ease. And then once the show or the rehearsal is underway, back it up with some actual serious musical cred and show what you're doing. And I think that's a pretty good recipe for any really field that involves public speaking and leadership. We look at our politicians, and I think a lot of them could do with just a bit of a sense of humor. Like it all seems a bit scripted, and there's a reason we use the expression, "Oh, it's he's talking like a politician." It's because it's a very kind of it's not, politicians don't speak in a friendly way, and I don't know why they don't. I don't know why they just don't use a bit of natural show the person who you are, warm up the crowd with a bit of natural speech and vocabulary, and then you can back it up with your credentials and your policies and whatever it is. But it feels like they're from the get-go playing this hard-nosed politician-y speak that isn't very warming. Oh, I agree with you. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't go into science route as a full-time gig, because, basically it's the same in academia as well. Or if you present at a conference, it's very hard to make a joke. And I didn't go back to do my PhD till I was like 37. And I had nearly 20 years in military and mining done at that stage. And, I'd make a joke at a conference or something, and, people would pull you up about making a joke. And I'm just like, oh, for fuck's sake. Like we got to make this stuff interesting and engaging. This is what science needs, not only amongst ourselves, but to the general population. And that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast. One is to talk to interesting people. One is to cross over multiple domains, but to make these things interesting, because lots of science and lots of information is not coming out in a decent format to people. And so I'm trying to bridge that gap and make things interesting. There might be people listening to this that go, wow, I'm going to go and watch that Harry Potter thing, or go to a local concert, or maybe I'll see if my kids want to play the violin, and maybe we can inspire somebody to go and, maybe think differently about music, because it can have such much benefits in our life. And like you said earlier on, it does touch us in numerous different ways,
Yeah. Well, and to your point there, I feel that, science and the old establishment of classical music can be a bit similar in that you've got to make them appealing, because once people can actually get past the sort of the formalities of, a rigorous scientific paper or presentation, or a rigorous, classical music concert with its, silence and sort of formalities there is joy and fun and interest and stuff that people want to engage with in there. It probably just needs an icebreaker of such, because I'm sure we've all seen science papers published about such and such. Like, the general population aren't going to read them. They're not presented in a way that is enticing. And the same with a lot of classical music. If it's not something you're genuinely interested and fascinated in, it needs to be presented in a way that does break that barrier. So, and hopefully, what you're doing and what we're doing with music is a way to be that icebreaker, so that then they can dive in and there's room to go the serious, full classical experience or full scientific experience. We just need to have the gateway drug, so to speak.
Gateway drug, So Nicholas, also as well, a question is, like, after you do a concert, how do you wind down and kind of, relax yourself and get to sleep? Or is it all kind of, drug, sex and rock and roll afterwards as well? Do you have an after party or what happens?
No, look, for me, it's just time. Like, a certain amount of time needs to elapse before the adrenaline just sort of trickles out of my limbs somewhere. I'm generally pretty hyped for at least a good hour after a show. I'm not a big drinker, like I said. Might be a cheeky cocktail or glass of wine with some of the orchestral members at the nearest watering hole, depending on the place. But yeah, I just obviously rehydrate, and it's just time. I can't go straight from the concert to my hotel room and jump straight into bed. I'm too wired, so I just need to let the natural endorphins or bits of adrenaline, whatever they are, just settle.
Yeah. And it's exactly
a long bath helps, or a hot shower. Also, actually, sometimes a cold shower, I've been investigating recent times, are doing wonders for me.
I think this is the exact same way we find in elite athletes as well. It takes 2 to 3 hours before they can wind down after a game and initiate sleep. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, and so my body is physically exhausted. I am tired, but it's just a matter of letting the mental and emotional kind of height come down to a more stable area.
Nicholas, I have one final question for you, and this is a self-serving question. We had a 5-day lockdown here recently in Western Australia, and I picked up a little instrument called ukulele, and I thought, I'm going to learn the ukulele.
Of course you did.
I did try. I have to say, I did try actually a couple of years ago, partly inspired by watching you guys at the orchestra about learning a musical instrument, because I never learned one as a kid. But obviously, due to my neck issues, I had a lot of issues with my left hand, and my left arm was atrophying, and I couldn't actually hold the ukulele because the nerve pain was too bad.
Wow.
So anyway, picked up the ukulele about a month ago. Was like, wow, got no more pain. Surgery's all worked. It's great. A couple of weeks ago, picked it up, and I've been learning a few songs using YouTube and a few other things. So Creek by Radiohead, Don't Worry.
Oh, nice.
Three Little Birds by Bob Marley, Fleetwood Mac Dreams, all the old stuff. Yeah. So my question to you is, what's your advice to an adult learner such as myself in their early 40s trying to learn a musical instrument? Should they just keep playing around and make it fun and use YouTube, or should you go to a proper school, or should I learn how to make music, or should I dedicate my life to trying to be a composer and conductor like you, Nicholas? What should I do?
Oh, look, I think at the end of the day, the best musicians are, there's something deep down in their genes that makes them great and make them tick. I know.
So I have to give up already.
I think that's what I'm leading to. Yes, it'll be a fun little hobby. But I think if you haven't got it by now, it's certainly not saying you can't enjoy it. But I don't know. I just feel that it's something you're either born to do, or nurtured from a young age. I think it'll only ever be a side interest for you, Ian. And look, I know plenty of people who take up singing in choirs or little band, gigs on the side, once they're sort of, an established adult. But I don't know anyone who's a professional musician who hasn't kind of been that their whole life. I'm sure there's the exceptions to the rule. I'm sure there are, and then probably some great ones that were an accountant for 40 years and then discovered they were a great. Who was that lady on America's Got Talent or something? Susan Boyle.
Susan Boyle, yeah.
Yeah, she was whatever she was for years and then had a great singing voice. There's exceptions like that. Look, is she the best musician? I have no idea. Maybe she's just got a great voice. That can be two different things.
Right.
But look, plug it away. If it gives you joy, I say absolutely do it. Music is for everyone, and of all ages should have different levels of enjoyment. And as long as it doesn't frustrate you and make you want to smash the ukulele, over your standing desk, then I say, keep plugging away. YouTube videos are great. There's so much free information that I'm sure you'll derive some pleasure from it.
No, I agree. I've got no illusions becoming a musician, but it is kind of funny. And I actually said that last week. I'm not going to let this frustrate me. If it frustrates me, I'll pull it down and pick it up again the next day. But what is interesting is that looking at some of the studies, that people who, try a musical instrument later on in their life have less prevalence of dementia and Parkinson's disease.
Wow.
Particularly with the drums.
Really?
Yeah, and people over 50 years of age. And I think it might be something got to do with the coordination because you're using 2 feet and 2 hands. It must be something got to do with the coordination. My wife said, there is no way you're getting a drum kit. She said, it's not happening. The ukulele's fine. You can play around with that. You're not getting a drum kit. Because every time I go and watch an orchestra, I watch the guy at the drums. And when they start beating the drums really heavy, my wife just looks at me and I've got this smile on my face like I'm, animal out of Muppets. We went to watch some Japanese drumming recently here in Perth at Fringe Festival, and I came out of it and I was just my chest was resonating. So I've got this kind of affinity to the drum, but I'm under strict instructions not to get one. So the ukulele will be my fun for now.
Well, they do say there's 2 types of people who play musical instruments. There's musicians and then there's drummers. So drums are hard. It's such a different skill set to playing anything else. I think just the hands. I mean, I can't think of another musical instrument that really uses the feet. Maybe, I guess the piano sort of does because you're pressing the pedals, but it's pretty much just 2 hands. So to incorporate all that kick drum stuff requires a different skill set.
My wife summed up the other day. She actually said, it was last night we were watching something and she goes, and there was someone playing the drums, and she said, when you hear a really good drummer, it's like there's 2 to 3 drummers playing continuously. And it's only one person. I'm like, oh, you're right. That's actually a good way of summing it up. And that's what it did sound like. Nicholas, our time is coming to an end. I do want you to hang on the line afterwards because I have a recommendation for you. So after the outro, please hold the line, as they say. So Nicholas, if people want to follow your work, they want to see you as an inspiring next Hans Zimmer, you might be in the 4th iteration of the Dark Knight series, or Batman, writing the scores. How can people follow your work? How can people find out where you're going to be playing in post-coronavirus times? And what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I have a website, which is just Nicholas Buc, BUC.com, nicholasbuc.com. And of course, I'm active on Twitter and Instagram. And my handle there is Buc Nicholas. So just my surname first, Buc Nicholas. And I'm usually regularly posting things that I'm up to, whether it's arranging or conducting or composing. And I have an events page on my website, which is looking a little empty this year.
I was going to say, I just clicked on it. I think it's blank.
Look, I have actually quite a few projects coming up. it's probably blank from last year. It's a hangover from 2020. So I will be sure to update that pretty soon before this podcast reaches people's ears. Because I've got plenty coming on, at least in Australia this year.
Some great pictures up on your website as well. Really great pictures of you in different settings, composing, conducting, traveling. It's absolutely fantastic photography on here as well. Really well done website. And you can see here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's really nice. And you can see here as well some of the people that Nicholas has worked with. And a few weeks ago, just prior to this podcast, I actually just shouted out my sitting room to my wife, that's the guy. She's like, relax, what are you talking about? We were watching the final of Junior MasterChef. And,
Oh, yes.
Nick, you were the conductor of the back with the mini orchestra, as I called it.
Yeah. No, that was good fun. That was one of the highlights of 2020 was going into the Channel 10 studios and doing all the MasterChef scores live. Very, very fun.
It was great. All right, so you've heard it there, guys. Go over and check out Nicholas Buc at nicholasbuc.com. Lots of information there. Stay tuned there for events or follow him on Instagram. Definitely worth a follow. And looking forward to seeing you again in action with your baton, not your wand.
Thanks for having me in. It was a pleasure to chat.
Great stuff. Thanks, Nick.